it, Gary, for me. All right. Council is now back in session. Thank you all for your patience. We will be done hopefully before midnight. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Okay.
R2116.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, next on the agenda are three, I believe, proposed postponements for resolutions R2116 and R20.
We'll do them one by one.
Okay, we're going to do them one by one? Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Is there a motion to postpone until the second regular meeting, December 2012, R2116?
So,
It said December.
To December 12th.
Oh, December 12th. Apologize.
So moved.
Yes.
So moved.
Our clerk said, that is not my error.
All
So
right.
moved.
December 12th. All right, so is there a second?
You see how fast she moves?
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, you please present the next item.
all right, next is on legislative action is R2316, which is the the Rogers property annexation and public facilities agreement status.
Is there a motion to postpone R2316 until December 12th, 2016?
So moved. So second.
Oh, all right, there was a lot there. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our next item?
Okay, next on legislative action is Resolution 2416, which is entitled Annexation Resolutions Implementation Status.
Same deal. Is there a motion to postpone R2416 until December 12th, 2016?
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Next is the second reader, 01916, involving traffic impact analyses.
On second reader. Is there a motion to adopt O1916 on second reader?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I asked to have this removed from the consent calendar because I wanted the community to hear one more time the need for this legislation.
Alderman Littman?
I could answer, but I think since Mr. Gutwald's here, he's the expert, I would ask him to speak up.
You're welcome.
Pete Gutwald, Director of Planning and Zoning. I think, well, first of all, the purpose of the legislation was to reduce the threshold in which a traffic impact study would be required and also remove the discretionary language that, from my perspective, was a little bit arbitrary as to when to expect a traffic study. But I think looking at the nature types of developments that are occurring in the city, to remove the arbitrary language and set expectations for what types of developments would be required to do a traffic study is more applicable to the types of developments and growth, types of developments and site plans that are coming through the city, so we can capture what's going on in the city and evaluate what the traffic needs are. So that's sort of the jettison for reducing the threshold and then removing the discretionary language. Sorry, I'm getting a little tired myself.
May I finish, Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Does this mean that you will have no discretion at all?
No, there is some other language in which if there's a known traffic problem, it's not just based off of volume, but if there's a traffic safety issue that we are aware of or that the community is aware of, we can require a traffic study. And then there is a third criteria into the distance between intersections. Again, it's sort of a traffic circulation situation in which I have discretion to require a traffic study. So there are other opportunities other than just the threshold of 250 trips per day.
Okay, so this gives you some level of comfort because you don't have to make some of these decisions, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand, why the need for the traffic study, but I either didn't hear or at this point I don't quite understand why the 400 and why now dropping it to 250. It's just
Well,
the numbers, that's what
I think in my staff report, I kind of highlighted the different types of developments that would trigger a traffic study. 400 trips per day is a fairly large, it's about 40 units, and the city of Annapolis doesn't see a lot of 40-unit developments on a regular basis. There are some that are out there, but 25, and when you research throughout the state, other jurisdictions and municipalities, what triggers a traffic impact study, it's more in line with about 250 trips per day. They usually use peak hour trips, but that equates to about 250 trips per day. So 250 is more of what's being practiced throughout the state, and I thought 400 is a high level of development. So if you looked at my staff report, I showed you the differences as to what types of developments currently would be required with that threshold versus the 250, which would trigger that threshold. So I kind of gave you, and the types of developments that are occurring in the typical types of developments that are occurring in and around the city of Annapolis, I thought was more in line with the 250 trips per day.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Is there a motion to adopt O-1916 on third reader?
So moved.
Is there a second? Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panelidis.
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Alderman Bush.
Aye.
Alderman Payon.
No.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Aye.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Aye.
Alderman Lippman.
Aye.
Alderman Kirby.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, we have reached O-2216, which is the city's New Forest Conservation Act.
Is there a motion to adopt O-2216 on second reader?
Second.
All right, we're going to discussion, and I think we'll begin with amendments. We have two sets of amendments, the working group's amendments, and we'll deal with those first, and then the second ones as well. The environmental matters, rules in city government, proposed amendments after that. So Alderman Lippman, do you want to speak to the first set?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How we've been working this, Alderman Budge has been speaking to the working group amendments, and I've been speaking to the joint committee.
Sure. Let's start by explaining to the public what the working group was or is. The working group consisted of 4 members of the council who came together last summer, a year ago summer, based on following the public hearing on one of the predecessor pieces of legislation. We worked with members of staff, members of DNR, and we looked back at the prior attempts at legislation on the Forest Conservation Act, lined them all up side by side, and went through the entire thing from top to bottom, figuring out which pieces, which recommendations from which council and which bodies we would incorporate in the current draft, and discussed obviously some of our priorities and so forth. That led to the draft that was before us that we introduced on first reader in May. Along the way, we had several conversations with the Department of Natural Resources, who has final approval authority over this legislation. We had given them drafts, and when we were going to first reader, they were considering a draft, and they came back after we had gone to first reader with some comments about items that DNR found would not be approvable. So these working group amendments came from those of us in that working group as suggestions to meet the DNR requirements for the drafts that we had had thus far. This is prior to public hearings or anything like that, to meet DNR requirements. And we submitted them to DNR, and they've subsequently been approved by DNR. So briefly, these amendments, some of them are editorial, some of them are more substantive. The First Amendment, we are adjusting the language to correct basically a type of an editorial error. When we had all of these different versions of the act lined up, one of the versions, we just made a copy and paste error from the wrong column. We were trying to go for the model act, and we picked the poor editor picked from the wrong column, and we need to fix it. The second one is a minor correction to our definition of unwarranted hardship. This will get rewritten or written over by the joint committee amendments, which Alderman Littman will be describing shortly. The Third Amendment it addresses the validity of a forest conservation plan. We had language in talking about if the forest conservation plan is valid for 5 years unless the conditions in the forest change substantially or whatever, and we wound up just chasing our tails trying to define what that meant. So we take out all of the chasing tail stuff and just say it's valid for 5 years, period. Sorry. The next amendments are clarification of clarification to DNR and the public of how the city code and enforcement and permitting and so forth work in Title 17 versus other parts of the code. In our code, if you have an application that has been approved, like you get a building permit or so forth, if you do nothing on that action, it will become invalid after a certain period of time. And that's what we're trying to get through here. We changed the wording to make that clearer. We adjust the wording for clarity on the non-compliance fees that come from the Model Act. And then finally, we had built into the ordinance the concept of healthy forest, which implies also the concept of unhealthy forest, that healthy forests are inherently something you want to save versus the unhealthy one. DNR just flatly said, no way, we're not going there. So this amendment takes the concept of healthy forests out of the Forest Conservation Act entirely. And so with that being said, I move the working group amendments 1 through 6.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Alderman Littman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the screen just blacked out. Thank you. Okay. These amendments were largely or entirely written to be responsive to the comments we received from the Planning Commission. If you look in your deck, you have a recommendation from the Planning Commission with a number of recommendations, and most, at least probably about half, or if not more, I haven't tried to count, but a lot of these recommendations are from the Planning Commission. This legislation also got referred to the AEC, and their comments have been considered, and then of course we had a lengthy public hearing that took notes from and considered, so these amendments were responsive to all of those requests. The 3 committees met at the same time, or consecutively, I guess, technically. Environmental Matters, Rules and City Government, and Economic Matters, so I'll go through them. Amendment number 1 is clarifying that the provisions of this ordinance or act apply to, or the terms apply to just this specific act. I think it was Planning Commission noted that certain terms have different meanings in other parts of the code. Amendment 2 replaces DNEP with Planning and Zoning for obvious reasons. Amendment 3 is referring to the definition of 100-year flood, and it's mostly just a technical fix of just clearing up language that doesn't apply to the city of Annapolis. 4 has to do with technical manual, which is a duplicative reference that was taken out. Amendment 5 has to do with the definition of unwarranted hardship, and there was lengthy debate and consideration during the joint committees, and this is the language that the committees came up with. The amendment number 6, this was language that Mr. Delavan was brought up during the committee session, and after a lengthy back and forth discussion, we came up with language that the committees were all comfortable with, that was achieving the goal that Mr. Delavan was asking for. Amendment number 7 refers to the technical manual. The Planning Commission, if you recall, asked us to consider whether, when the department updates the technical manual, whether the city council or subcommittees or some other entity should have approval authority. After discussion during the city council meetings, the committee meetings, and with lots of input from the city staff, we came up with language that ensured that the department would have to notify various entities, including the AEC, the entire city council, and the city's planning commission, but that none of those entities would have approval authority. We felt that the committees and all these other entities, the council, the commission, would all be able to address any issues that they thought were presented in the amendments to the technical manual. Amendment number 8 provided for a temporary stay, not a permanent stay. And all this does, it's an important step, but it allows time for a potential appellant to file a court action when they have jurisdiction to file a court action, and it just gives them up to 60 days thereafter to ask the court for injunctive relief. If they fail to ask for injunctive relief or it's denied, this stay closes no matter what. So it's just a temporary short-term stay. Amendment number 9. This is for consistency. This is for the weekly electronic updates. It's been asked for by many entities and people over the years, so it's being responsive to that request that came up during the public hearing. Amendment 10. This is for clarity. This was sought by Mr. Dales, and the committees agreed that clarity was warranted, and this is responsive to that request. 11, amendment number 11 is cleanup language. Amendment 12, in various parts of the ordinance or the act, there is requirements for the department to post notifications on the website, and we just missed a spot. As many documents, and just in this one document, there wasn't that same request, so it's for consistency. Amendment 13 is cleanup language, just moving a phrase for grammar correction. Amendment 14, this is cleanup language regarding the cost to capture what the work group and the joint committees all agreed were the goals for when fee in lieu was going to be enacted. We want to make sure that the costs were accurate as best as possible. Amendment 15, this was having to do with the city proposed to increase the likelihood that, Amendment 15 had to do with when the person paying fees pays. Without the amendment, they would be allowed to pay after the permit was issued, and this makes sure the payment is done before the permit is issued, which certainly encourages payment to actually be made. So with that said, I move for amendments 1 through 15.
Second?
Alderman Kirby?
Yeah, I'd first like to know if all 21, I think I counted 21 amendments have been to DNR.
Yes.
Okay.
DNR approved all of them.
Okay, and these amendments were they in fact after the public hearing stage?
The amendments were all drafted after the public hearing because
Okay.
they were responsive to the public hearing, so.
Okay.
But they were all discussed in public at
Okay.
the joint committee.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is because I did hear some conversation tonight that they thought that these amendments were extensive enough to have a second public hearing. And I just heard 21 of them, if I counted correctly. And I've got nothing else to say at this point.
Is there a second? All right, all in favor, please say
Well,
aye.
I'm sorry.
Aye.
We're voting on the
On
set of
this.
amendments, yes.
Oh, okay.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there a motion to adopt O-2216 as amended on second reader?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, you probably need to go to page 16 and right up at the top of the page.
Page what?
16.
Sure.
16
16 of what?
of the piece of legislation.
Definitions.
Yeah, you see the triple Ks?
I gotta get to page 16.
Get there. Page 16. The first entry is triple Ks.
I don't, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Page 16 of the legislation.
Page
Line
16
2, line 2.
Yeah, line 2.
I don't have.
Right at the top, triple Ks, retention.
It's just have section 5103 annotated Code of Maryland in the second line.
You gotta go to the one with the line numbers. You gotta go to the second version of the legislation that has.
I have it in hard copy. You need it?
Does it start with retention means the deliberate holding? Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. What in particular, we're talking about trees, and the KKK, I just don't, I think you need to change this heading, and I think I've asked for this heading to be changed in the work session. I think it's just insensitive for me to sign off on any piece of legislation that starts with KKK and trees are involved. It probably means something different to some of you guys than it would mean for me. But I'm not comfortable with this heading of KKK.
Do you mind if I ask Mr. Olson a question?
Absolutely.
Mr. Olson, do you have a recommendation on how we could change the numbering?
Well, let's see here. I mean, it would require, it might require changing a lot of the numbering. We could use, another kind of, I mean, instead of doing A, B through Z,
We call it just K, 1, 2, 3?
we could do it like that. Like when we get to the triple letters, we could do AA1.
I'm not suggesting we change all of them. I'm just suggesting just for
Just the
page
K.
16, line 2, change KKK to K, 1, 2, 3.
Whatever you please, you can do, because it's not going to change the substance of the legislation.
I'm not looking for the change in the substance of the legislation.
know.
I'm looking
We
for the
understand.
change in
Yeah.
the letters KKK.
So you can do K, and anything following that
1,
would
2,
be,
3.
would be fine. 1, 2, 3.
K123,
How about
perfect.
1, 2?
Or 1, 2.
I move that we change on page 16, line 2, KKK, to change it to K, 1, 2, 3.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there any other discussion? Alderman Arnett?
Yes, I just wanted to express to both my colleagues, Budge and Lippman, my admiration that you could actually go through all of those amendments and so clearly describe them to us after all of this time and all those complications, so thank you.
Anyone else? Alderwoman Layson?
Yes, thank you. I guess I have been working on this legislation the longest. I was on the original committee that was set up with representation of all the stakeholders. We had the business community, we had the environmental community, we had city council members, Alderman Pfeiffer and I, and we deliberated under Judge Joe Menck for, I don't remember, a year maybe? Seemed like forever, yeah, absolutely right, like this process here, no different. And we came up with recommendations that this body could not see fit to approve. And what I've learned is that if we don't like what the recommendations from the community say, then we ignore them and we do something different. And so we created another committee. Alderman Littman created another committee. And this time, this committee was made up of 4 aldermen, myself included, and no representation from the business community, though I learned today I was supposed to be it. Not even, several degrees, but not qualified. But the environmental community did have a representative in the aldermen. We met for a year, a little over a year, as was stated. I had legislation, the aldermen had legislation, we had the model code, the model ordinance from the state, and we were able to work and merge them all together in a vacuum because the business community was not part of the discussion. Unlike the first committee, when everyone had an opportunity to deliberate together, we weren't that transparent this time around. Legislation that is just described as still needing to be tweaked. It's not right, but it's 80% okay. We'll come around to it later, and let's just pass something and come back to it later, when we know that we don't have a habit of coming back to stuff later. We've created a situation where we all have received threats. If we don't pass this legislation, we'll never get elected again, or worse. It's probably the most contentious piece of legislation that does not include all of our community. It is very targeted, and it will meet with success this evening, and I will vote for it. I will not bail like others have done, because I did commit to it. But do understand that the community is watching. And maybe we need to create another standing committee for the city that includes the voice of the business community, the voice of the professional practitioners. You know, we have so many segments of our community who are disenfranchised. I think it would behoove us to fix that. Just like this evening when Mr. Stanton shared with us the need for us to come up with our plan to deal with social ills of the community. There's obviously other needs so that we can make our city one city again, or at least not leave anyone out of the discussion. You know, tonight I would prefer to postpone this to have another public hearing, just to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And not for 3 months or a year, and the mayor had committed to a month certain. But that's obviously not going to fly for some reason, and I have to wonder why. We've been working on this for several years. What would another month matter? So this will go forward, and I suspect that when the next legislation comes. Hopefully it'll come, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to give everybody a voice.
Let me say, I was talking with Mr. Elson, the city attorney, a moment ago, and I said, what do you think is the most worked on piece of legislation, certainly in my tenure and in yours? And he said, it's the Forest Conservation Act. And I've said many times, the adequate public facilities and the Forest Conservation Act are the two most important pieces of legislation we're probably going to pass. I'm a sponsor. I plan to vote for it tonight. And I just want to say personally thank you to everyone, because I know it's not easy. I know it's midnight right now. And there's been a lot of work. I give Alderman Littman a lot of credit, and Budge and Finlayson and Arnett for being on that work group and committee. I don't think people realize how many hours you all put into it. So thank you for all the work you have done. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Alderman Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to thank all the sponsors, and especially those who sat down on all those grueling hours and all the grueling conversation from both ends, weighing it. I know it's been tough, and I think that both pieces of legislation, while I may have weighed them, adequate public facilities and also this forest conservation piece, I was keenly aware that I was the tip vote tonight. So don't know how many people knew that, but it seemed like it. I sure got enough emails. And I was prepared to postpone tonight had it gotten to me for a fifth vote. I would have postponed just because I walked in this council 7 years ago with 7 votes in my hand to move everybody to 2 a.m. for a liquor license. And that process had failed for 13 years in this same city of Annapolis, despite being brought before council after council after council after council. 13 years that failed. So there isn't a liquor establishment in Ward 6. Not a one. So it didn't do anything for me as far as my voting constituency, but it was another ward and other wards in the city that was suffering. And that was on my mind. That was simply not a level playing field. So if anybody has been excluded from this process, and I was not aware that it took DNR so long to get through an amendment or proposed amendments of sorts. And I'll be the first to say I want to get it away, but I don't want to act in complete haste without it being on record that I would have voted for reconsideration tonight. I would have voted yes tonight just to be able to reconsider, because I thought it would prevail tonight also. So I hope and pray that nothing comes up in these next couple of weeks before we meet again that was going to necessitate this reconsideration vote. So I intend to support the legislation. Thanks.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Madam, is there a motion to adopt O-2216 on third reader?
Second.
Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panalady?
Very happy to be the first one to say aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett?
Very happy to be the third one to say aye.
Alderman Budge?
Aye, aye.
Alderman Payne?
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles?
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson?
Aye.
Alderman Littman?
Aye.
Alderman Kirby?
I like that we're adding something in front of each of these.
Aye.
Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, next is the corresponding resolution 1816 regarding fees and fines that would be due under the Forest Conservation Act.
Is there a motion to adopt R 1816 on second reader?
So moved.
Any discussion? Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panalady?
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett?
Aye, aye,
Alderman Budge?
Aye.
Alderman Payne?
Aye.
Alderman Pendle Charles?
Aye.
Alderwoman Finlayson?
Aye.
Alderman Littman?
Aye.
Alderman Kirby?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Next is O-26 16, regarding extension of hours in parking districts 3 and 4.
Oh, second, is there a motion to adopt? Any discussion? Alderman Budge?
Yes, Mayor and members of the council. The Transportation Committee has met on this ordinance a couple of times, and we've held a couple of public hearings in addition to the public hearing that was held here in the City Council. And we have a rather odd situation. As you can tell from the title, this extends hours on certain streets in parking districts 3 and 4. Parking district 4 is almost unanimous in what they want to do. We have received no opposition, and as you heard tonight, in President's Hill, which is in parking district 4, they wish to proceed with this in a timely fashion because of the restaurants that are opening up at the bottom of their streets. On the other hand, parking district 3, which is Murray Hill, is still debating several issues related to this, and I am still receiving emails from residents saying, "I never heard of this. I need to, please don't do it," or "Please do it," this kind of stuff. It is still very much in play. And Murray Hill had asked that we postpone considering this legislation so that they can further consider it. They're having a community meeting on it in October before it comes back to the council. And so we can't both postpone it for Murray Hill and be timely for President's Hill. So I am going to recommend to my colleagues on the council a parliamentary maneuver designed to basically split this legislation in two. Take the District 4 portion tonight. Based on the Transportation Committee amendments, we need one small amendment to do that. And then I will return to the council with the District 3 portion under a new ordinance number, and we will pick up the discussion right where we left off. So that being said, I would like to propose two amendments. The first is on page 2, starting at page 2, line 28, and extending through page 4, line 19, strike everything. That's the District 3 part.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Actually, if I could, just to add, Alderman Budge, I think in watching him navigate this, the Transportation Committee has done a yeoman's job. I'm reminded of the old political expression that some of his friends are for it, some are against it, and he's for his friends. He's tried to navigate a very thorny process, and I think this is just the latest iteration of this that makes some sense to move forward, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to fight about the other piece, but I'm happy to second this as well as the Second Amendment. Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
Second Amendment is from the Transportation Committee, and it is Transportation Committee Recommendation Amendment 4, which is on page 5, line 17. After the word effect, insert 45 days, and that describes the period after which the ordinance will go into effect. This gives city staff time to procure and erect the new parking district signs, train the parking contractor, and so forth.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there a motion to adopt as amended?
So moved. Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney?
The third reading.
I think we're at adjournment right now.
Look for a motion to... Oh, third reader, I apologize.
Oh, okay.
Is there a motion to adopt on third reader?
So moved.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Sure will. Mayor Panelidis,
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett, Alderman Budge,
Aye.
Alderman Payon,
Aye.
Alderwoman Kendall Charles,
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson,
Aye.
Alderman Littman,
Aye.
Alderman Kirby.
Aye.
The ayes have it. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting adjourned.
It's a Tuesday.
Yeah. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.